is that there's a really high importance on financial objectives. But what the trend we've seen changing over recent years is that a bigger requirement is coming towards improving employee productivity and staff retention. So we see staff turnover within SMBs getting higher and higher, and actually that's becoming a more important problem for SMBs to solve. And one of the bits of feedback Simon and I get when we're talking with kind of business leaders is, how do you get gains in all of these areas? Sometimes it can seem almost impossible. You know, how do you grow revenues, increase profits whilst constantly stripping cost out of your business? And equally, how do you, when you're stripping cost out of your business, how do you improve your employee experience? Very tough. But one of the reasons kind of adoption of cloud computing has been so high in recent years is because you can get net gains in all of those 5 areas relatively quickly by moving to the cloud. So when looking at what's driving businesses to the cloud today, we can see that although cost reduction is a factor on here, the overriding reason for shifting to the cloud is non-fiscal reasons. We can see that improving employee productivity is key, keeping up with changing customer demands, getting ahead of the competition, improving the kind of employee experience with flexible workplace options, attracting new customers. And talking with Simon about this previously, what we tend to find when our customers have migrated to the cloud and they've had a successful migration, and we ask them what was it that really kind of drove it for you, they said that by achieving all of these productivity benefits, they started to see the financial rewards at the end of it. So new revenue streams were opened, innovation lines were open where they're being more profitable innovation lines. And actually the financial rewards came as a result of the productivity benefits. So I think all of us in this room here today will have different experiences in the cloud. We'll all have be at different stages of our digital transformation journey. So it's probably worth looking at what, if anything, is preventing businesses from moving to the cloud today. And when we talk with customers, we still see that 40% have real kind of concerns with security. And that's one of the reasons we've got Josh here to do a session on securing your cloud. But equally, many still find it hard to figure out what's going to work best when they move to the cloud. We still see a huge number of customers are going on that journey alone and they have integration difficulties. Decision makers often don't set clear goals in that area, and as a result we see kind of resistance to change as a really key theme. And that's linked to this not being a priority for decision makers. So we see successful digital transformation journeys generally being linked to it being the number one objective for a business. They set it as their number one goal at an exec level, and it drives from top to bottom through that business. I think what's really key for you to understand is there's probably not a customer that we have worked with, myself and Simon, and probably Josh as well, where they haven't felt some of these fears. They're real, but actually by working with us, we can help you mitigate those fears in a pretty simple, straightforward way with some of the funding mechanisms that we've got, some of the mechanisms for migrating your data to the cloud. That can help alleviate some of that stress and turn it into an opportunity for you. One thing that's worth noting, lack of adequate IT staffing skills in the cloud is point 4. So let's just zoom in on that for a moment, because this piece of IDC research, although separate, shows that almost a third of all businesses in the UK are struggling with cloud skills in their business. And I think it's the single biggest conversation my team have with customers, struggling to, and I know we had a session on this previously, so for those in the room, you would have heard this being doubled down on today. But it's really impacting the successful nature of many people moving to the cloud, many customers moving to the cloud in a meaningful way. And I think training certifications and kind of getting your teams upskilled play a critical role in that, but so too do our partners. So CloudBridge play a really key role for us in helping our customers to get over this major hurdle. But let's make kind of no bones about it. The IT skills gap is having a really direct impact on digital adoption rates across the UK, and all of the skills are often moving to our major cities. We see London with 52% digital adoption rates as a result of kind of staffing, but the same in the northwest with Manchester. And as we look across Scotland, the northeast and the east of England, kind of digital adoption rates are lagging. We all know that the cloud will continue to play a really crucial role in how we tackle the UK's biggest challenges around sustainability, around profitable business growth, around kind of enabling startups to grow at scale. So I think unlocking the value of data through cloud is going to be key. A public first report launched last week indicated that digital technologies could grow the UK economy by 413 billion by 2030, a huge number. That's the equivalent of 19% of the entire UK economy today, but that will only be possible if we can overcome this skills gap at pace. So jumping ahead a bit, so why Amazon Web Services? Why would you look to kind of work with us? Well, I like this quote from Andy Jassy, who's our former AWS CEO, but now CEO of Amazon. There's no compression algorithm for experience. And I think that's because within cloud, you have to reach certain milestones of scale to be able to experience different situations with customers. So rewind back to 2006, when Amazon decided to take its .com web infrastructure to market under the name Amazon Web Services. Overnight, cloud computing was born as a principle. And that overnight gave businesses access to low variable cost pay-as-you-go infrastructure in the cloud that was available at any moment. And that changed everything. We saw a wave of digitally native businesses being born. And our cloud as you see it today, our platform as you see it today, is built from millions of conversations that we've had with our customers. I spoke about working backwards earlier. The platform today is us directly working backwards from our customer and solving their problems in the cloud. I like this quote from one of our customers, John Santo, and I think it really kind of best summarizes maybe some of the benefits that SMBs can see with cloud computing. AWS enables small companies like ours to enjoy a back-end system of the same quality that billion-dollar companies have. I think pre-2006 that was totally unthinkable, but today it's something which you can have scaled up in a matter of moments. And I'm pleased to say the market's really recognised this. Only last week we were recognised as the leader in the most important Gartner Magic Quadrant in the cloud industry for the past 12 years, and it's something we're really proud of. And from our perspective, it's something which we have a real focus on. So if you're questioning why you would potentially look to build your business on AWS, I think we believe that we stand apart in the market because of these 7 factors. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one thing I suppose I would point out is the service breadth and depth, 200 services which are just continually growing as we work backwards from the customer. Those services will continue to grow at that rate, directly linked back to problem solving. Our global footprint as well, and the fact that kind of machine learning is an interesting piece. Really, it's our customers that are driving that, but more machine learning happens on the Amazon Web Services platform than anywhere else on earth, and that's not us. That's our customers using our platform and growing it. And the ecosystem is something I'm very proud of. So here with CloudBridge today, but we have more than 100,000 APN partners globally that are helping us to really scale and serve our customers at scale. So just looking at the AWS ecosystem, we've talked a bit about the building piece, which is all on the left-hand side of this slide, but there's a whole other side to our business, which I've been speaking to many customers about this morning. That's the marketplace side, so how you buy services through AWS. And marketplace is now the go-to procurement method for procuring all SaaS software needs really in the market, and I think it's been quite game-changing. So if you're not using that today, come and talk to us. We're on the CloudBridge stand all day, so come and talk to us about that. And my final slide is really, I've talked a bit about why AWS. I can't talk about this slide highly enough. Why would you use a cloud partner? And when I talk with my customers who have migrated successfully to the cloud, they end up pulling all the big levers that they can. They use us as a resource. They use our partners as a resource. And it's a really three-pronged approach between their own internal team, CloudBridge as a partner, and ourselves. And I think you can really reach desired business outcomes much faster. Of course, reduce operational costs because our partners can access funding which you can't get direct through AWS. And I think focus on innovation is a really key thing I talked to Simon a lot about. And that is really not innovating for innovation's sake, but it's innovating in the right areas and then allowing you as business leaders to really monopolize and capitalize on that innovation to actually grow your business. Talked already about reducing security and compliance risk, and Josh will go into that shortly. But I think developing skills, so closing the skills gap is something which our partners, we couldn't do without our partners, and I want to thank CloudBridge for that. It's a really important role they play for us. So I think on that note, I'll hand over to Simon.
Lovely, thank you, Will. Yeah. We have Simon Walker, Managing Director at CloudBridge.
So I'm going to take it kind of a little bit of a step back from the kind of high-level view and actually show you what we actually do for some of our customers and how we actually help them with the journey into the cloud. One of the biggest areas when we start talking to the customer is trying to prove that we're a good partner to work with. So for us, it's important to let customers know that we don't do anything else. So we kind of latched our wagon to AWS 5 years ago, and we're holding on for dear life. You mentioned like 200 services. It's almost impossible for an organisation with 65 people as we've got in ours at the moment, growing on a weekly basis, to know Azure, GCP, Oracle Cloud, because there's just too much to know. So we really, really focus and specialise on one partner with regard to cloud. Obviously, there's an ecosystem of partners we work with as well, Logic being here today. One of the other key things that we've really invested in is understanding some of these funding programs. I've talked to a lot of customers today, and I would say not one of them knew about some of the funding programs that are available from Amazon to help move into the cloud. And I'm going to go through a bit of that today as well, and give you an example of a customer that we've worked with and the type of funding that we achieved for them to help them with that migration. Because there's a lot of disruption when you move to the cloud. If we can kind of mitigate some of the concerns and risks that are there with regard to TCO and costs, then that's going to be really, really great. So these are the questions that I've been hearing today about where do we start? And it is, when you're an organisation, you're running at 100 miles an hour trying to deal with your customers anyway, and someone says, we need to move to the cloud. You're like, brilliant, okay, where do I actually start? What do I do? What does that actually even mean? What's it going to cost? How long is it going to take? So all these questions come up. And what we've done is essentially developed a practice around helping customers to move on a journey all the way from assessment, looking at what the customer is doing at the moment, what that's going to look like, design in the discovery and mobilize phase, migrate, and then once you're in the cloud, that doesn't stop there. Modernization is key. So we do a lot of projects where we've moved the customer to the cloud, and then we're talking about serverless computing, containerization. A lot of organizations don't necessarily want to be locked in one cloud, so they want to talk about Kubernetes and other services. So modernization is a huge part of customers' journey into the cloud, and that's where the costs start to really come down. Organizations that move their SQL databases and Windows OSs in there are still like, oh, it's still quite expensive. It's like, well, you haven't modernized yet. You know, you need to move off Windows and SQL and those expensive technologies. And you can achieve the same with some of the Amazon and off-the-shelf Linux type technologies as well. And then we've built another two practices off the back of that: cost optimization, so FinOps as we call it now, and managed services. So skill gap is a problem in the industry that we're in. We've obviously got a practice that's just purely focused on technology, so we're lucky to recruit excellent individuals that just want to do technology and nothing else. So we've built a 24/7 offering that helps customers move into the kind of transition of cloud, so they've got that extra support. So this is where I'm going to kind of jump into an example. So we've got two examples, depending on the size of the organisation. So this is an output of an organisation during the assess phase with 50 virtual machines or servers. So the program that we tap into is a program called MAP, and it stands for Migration Acceleration Program. First phase is deploying some agents across the estate to collate a whole load of information to build up that TCO. It will actually right-size your environment as well to tell us what it's going to look like in AWS. It would even tell us what kind of wave groups of architecture can be moved at a certain time. It gives us complexity levels as well, and that helps us build a picture. This is all fully funded by AWS for us to do that, and very little effort on the part of the customer apart from deploying the actual agents. Once we've built that, we start to build a business case and create a statement of work for the next phase, which essentially is to mobilize. We also talk to customers about the different migrations, the 5 Rs, and then we talk about the journey in which they want to go on. And most customers will do this optimized lift and shifts. That's looking for optimizations within the architecture to actually start saving money straight away. And then obviously in the final phase, we start talking about replatforming or modernization. So an output of one of these assessments, and this is a real actual customer, where we tell them different scenarios of what it's going to look like in the cloud. The cost spend for the first year based on the migration, because although this customer will be potentially looking at spending on demand, no one goes for on demand, but let's say 1 year, no upfront RI, £755,000 a year. The first year is going to be 420,000 because obviously with the cloud, it's not instant. You have to build it over time. We're also building backup. How much is backup going to cost? And one of the most important slides is funding. So this particular customer got £500,000 of funding to migrate into the cloud. So their actual consultancy to be paid was 0, and they had enough for a coffee and a chili at this event. So it was a win-win. We also give them an indication of timeline and also how much time for the actual customer is going to need, because that is the investment. So although we might be getting funding to pay for our resources to actually migrate them into the cloud, they're going to give up some time of their business, those individuals. So we kind of estimate that, so that can be plotted into the journey, so they know who's going to be doing what. Not all customers are that size, so there is other programs that we tap into. The program that we tap into for kind of below 50 servers, or even 2 servers, we have opportunities. We use the well-architected program. So that allows us to do what we call a well-architected review of an on-premise workload. What that essentially means is we ask a whole bunch of questions, do a discovery workshop, understand what it's going to look like, how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to be to migrate, so all that other stuff that you saw, and we put it into a statement of work, and then we apply for funding to actually get you migrated. It might not cover it 100%, but there's still funding available to do that. So just doing that first part is free. If you come over to the stand, there's a QR code that you can scan. It kind of tells you a bit more about that as well. I've already said that. But yeah, largely, come and talk to us. You can't tell you all about this in just 10 minutes. We've got a whole bunch of customers that we can talk about as well. But thanks for your time, and I'll hand over to Josh.
That's lovely. Thank you, Simon. And next up, we have Josh Davies, who's product manager at Alert Logic, and he's travelled all the way from my hometown, South London, just to be with us today. So big welcome for Josh.
Thank you very much for having me. So I think it was really interesting to see some of the stuff that was drawn up around the concerns that people have when migrating to cloud, and seeing that security came out on top, and this is really why I'm here to talk to you today about why you can have confidence when you are migrating to a cloud environment, what the differences might be versus an on-premise deployment, the data center you're used to in the cloud, and also there's a lot of similarities as well. And to do so, I'm going to be using a little bit about ransomware, I think is the use case that most everybody has heard of. It's in the news all the time. And one of the benefits of when you approach securing yourself against ransomware, having a good, robust incident response plan, is actually you end up being secure against a lot of other threats. There's a lot of commonalities between them. Ransomware is just a goal. So I think we'll get into first there's 2 fundamental tenets of securing AWS environments. And we're going to look at the AWS shared security model today, or shared responsibility model. The well-architected framework is another one, which we're not going to go into today, but it is something that I've worked with CloudBridge before to help kind of deliver, and something they can offer to make sure that you're not only efficient in how you build stuff, but also that it's secure as well. So starting us off with the shared responsibility model, and this really is a super interesting or easy to digest diagram that makes you understand what your responsibilities are in the cloud, because everybody knows they're going to be different when you move from a non-premise data center. Amazon are going to do some security requirements for you, but you would be mistaken if you were to believe they're going to handle all of your security requirements. You know, they treat you like responsible adults. They're going to let you do what you want to do with the infrastructure, which might not always be in the most secure way, but that's up to you to make those decisions. So, but AWS are going to secure everything, they're going to secure the cloud itself, make sure that nobody can access things like the physical data centers that house this. So the things that are highlighted in the dark color are AWS going to do. That leaves a lot then that's left around threat detection and response, vulnerability scanning, hardening, making sure that your user credentials, your IAM is being looked at and secures, and so on. And towards the end, I'll show you how you can help and how there's different ways you can solve these problems. AWS do a load of tools that you can use yourself if you want to take the DIY approach, but also there are services that can help you get further the way, depending on what your appetite is as an organization and what your resource constraints might be as well. So before I get into it, I like to use this example. I'm a bit of an ancient history nerd myself, and I think this is a great way to bring to life the types of attack sequences that are quite abstract in the cyber world with using a real-world example. So this is the cyber kill chain. Essentially, it's an attack sequence that needs to occur for an attack to be successful. You know, that actions and objectives on the far right, that's the real thing everyone's concerned about. The steps before lead up to that. So in the case of the Trojan horse attack, right, for those of you, sure you're familiar, you've seen the film with Brad Pitt and stuff, they failed many times to take the castle by storm, essentially. And they eventually decided to feign that they were giving up and left behind a wooden horse. So the reason behind this, or the thinking was, we understand that our attack sequences so far have failed. And we know the Greeks like Trojan horse, or the Trojans like large horses. Let's build a wooden one, and then let's weaponize that by getting in it. Delivery, then this is like sending a request to a server. You're parking it outside. You have to wait for the server or whoever it is to actually accept that, which is the Trojans literally pulling it in. And it's a very great metaphor for how cyber attacks work, right? Computers are stupid. They do what you tell them to do, and you have to make sure that you define their logical limits really, really well. Installation then, so we're in the building, but now we need to make sure we take some more control and actually embed ourselves there. So that's getting out of the horse. Soldiers start to spread around, take command and control of the environment, which is killing the guards and spreading to the watchtowers and the walls. At this point, you've got control of the city, and they can carry out their objective, which was destroy the city. You know, they salted the earth. Archaeologists these days can't find it, and there's some debate as to whether it even really existed or if it was just a great story. But the point is that there are many different objectives they could have done here. So ransomware was the objective, but they could have enslaved the populace. They could have just occupied the city and taken a levy, something like that. The attack sequences lead you to a position then where you can do whatever you want to and you have that full control and that full access. So let's look at the ransomware attack sequence. And the ransomware, really, when we hear ransomware, that is the encrypt stage at the far right. That is game over, essentially. So what do we need to get up to there? And it's the exploits part onwards that's interesting, hence why I've started there. But emails are really common one, phishing emails, right? We also see RDP or VPN exploitation. Remote services have really picked up as part of remote working. Also, web exploits. If you've got anything that's public-facing, somebody's going to be probing that and seeing if they can poke it and find a way in. Then you go and install yourself, and these days it's really fileless malware attacks that people are using. They call them fileless or living off the land because they're not bringing their own malware. They bring what we call these faithful malware friends who know how to utilize things like a PowerShell, which IT admins are going to use legitimately anyway, to do what they want it to do. Much, much harder to detect and block. I'm then going to look to elevate privileges, so I need to have access to everything. I need to be an admin. Admins already have access to anything. Mimikatz is a really common tool that's used there. At which point, you then can use those admin credentials to spread across the network, or alternatively, you could maybe try to worm using file share protocols, lots of different ways. But it's about spread. You need to make sure you have control of enough of the environment, then bypass the security software. Very common to turn off the EDR, AV controls. In fact, sophisticated GANs like Conti test out their techniques against the new updates to EDR tools. You know, they buy them legitimately and then practice their hacks on them. If they fail, they go back to the drawing board and reimagine something new. And then you get to the game over stage. When they've got enough of your environment, they encrypt it all, it really cripples your organizations, they send the ransom note. And that's really the ransomware part. So that's the tip of the iceberg ransomware. All of this has to occur before. And the good news is that this typically takes around 11 weeks to get to that final stage. So a lot of opportunities for us as defenders to identify a stage of this attack. Further to the left, the better, but still a lot of value at any stage here. Disrupt and break that kill chain so they can't get to encrypt and game over. And how you do this, right? It's really about making sure you have the right visibility to make the detections and then perform analytics on top of this. And I said that AWS offer loads of microservices and tools that you can use. GuardDuty is a great one. It does some analytics for you and things like malware. And you can write your own detections. CloudTrail, that's where a lot of your the cloud logs, something that really differs from an on-premise environment because this houses all of the kind of tenancy relevant things, admin changes, things that are done in the portal and such. And by pulling those in and also looking at your Windows, your Linux servers are up there, their logs, and network IDS is another really important one because this is your network packets. You know, imagine this is you're able to open up a letter and read the entirety versus logs. They let you look at the front of the envelope, and sometimes you know something might be dodgy, but you don't know exactly what. So IDS is super important there. And by combining all of these, I haven't got time to go through each of the value of them, but this is what you need to be monitoring so you can detect something at this, and I say disrupt that kill chain. So that's really, I did a lot about detect because I think that's really one of the areas that AlertLogic have strength in and really support the CloudBridge customers. But this appropriate ransomware strategy requires you to look across the board. So NIST cybersecurity framework is a great one. I know it's quite a busy slide. Feel free to take a picture. But you can find this type of thing online. And identify is the first thing. We need to know what it is we've got. AWS make it really easy with some of their features, and we also do asset discovery so we can see what you've got at any given time. You know, the fact that it allows agility for developers also can introduce some risks. They might put something in there and forget about it, for example. So you need to know what you've got and what the risks that are present on there, what vulnerabilities or exposures or even misconfigurations. Protect then, protect is an essential part of your strategy. Build up the walls, make sure nothing can get in, but also acknowledge that these protection things, they have to live in this fine line between balancing false positives So that means a block of something that's legitimate, that stops you doing your job, versus false negatives. And so by keeping your false positives down, they're going to have more false negatives. So things do slip through the gap, and as we look, people also look to circumvent and turn them off. So detect. You need to look at those data sources we had earlier, have 24/7 eyes on this. It's no surprise if I tell you most attacks occur outside of business hours. And I used to be a security analyst, and we were always busy during the public holidays, whether it's Thanksgiving for American customers or Christmas, because they know their best chance is catching you when your trousers are down. You're less likely to be able to respond to this. Which brings me to respond. Right? In response, there's lots of things you can do immediately. Automated response is a great way to contain those threats when you detect something. And there's been a lot more of an appetite for this. Before, people were like, no, don't touch my stuff, don't turn it off. Now we understand the impacts of a ransomware attack. We're more happy to take a user offline, take a machine offline, connect the detections with the response mechanisms. And finally, recover. We talked about some of the disaster recovery or backup services that are part of CloudBridge. That's really important here as well, because you need to be prepared for a compromise by treating it like inevitability. And part of that is responsibly having a backup plan if something really does get that far. But hopefully, it can be caught early and disrupted, so you never really have to use those data recovery services. Or if you do, maybe it's for 1 or 2 machines and not your entire estate. So this kind of pulls in some of the, I can't talk through some of this as we were going in the interest of time, but really I think the point here that you need to make sure you're not just putting all your eggs in one basket, you're not mounting up all your investment in the protect side of things, because building up your walls is really, really good, but once somebody's in, it might even be an insider or a person that makes a simple mistake and lets them in. If you don't have visibility on what's going on inside, you will assume that you're safe until you hit the news and then get that ransomware note. Detect, make sure you have all the data sources you need, visibility into them, you're performing the correct analytics, and you have somebody looking at this. And ultimately respond. Make sure that you have response policies in place. You've practiced these. It's not the first time we have a real incident. It's the time when you're having to find out how your incident response program works. Practice it. Get everybody involved. It's actually kind of fun, and people then understand we're all involved in security here, right? And then I understand my role. Also, if there's a single point of failure, like somebody going home, I've seen that happen where I've escalated an incident, and the only person who knows how to fix it is away on a holiday, and they did not have a good holiday. So finally, I'll pull it back to the shared responsibility model. And as I said, there are multiple ways you can meet this. We saw some of the tools AWS offer for the DIY approach. If you have a security team, a SOC, a 24/7 operations, that's a fantastic place to start. But then also, if you are looking for that augmentation, then you can see how CloudBridge and LitLogic cover up a lot of the security pieces. And when I actually sat down with CloudBridge and said, what can you do for the stuff that LitLogic can't help with around patch management, traffic encryption, it turns out they can do it all. So I had to double check that and make sure that we were right. But yes, this is really something where we can give you that end-to-end experience with a relationship like this, where LitLogic are the security specialists, identifying what the threats are, raising them to someone like CloudBridge, who's then able to go and respond to them, mitigate and break that kill chain on your behalf, giving you a complete incident in the morning. And yes, there was an alarm, but don't worry, it's all resolved and over now. Great, so I think that's it for myself, and we'll move to the questions.
Lovely, thank you, Josh. So bear in mind, beware of any large wooden horses outside your front door, any urgent emails or text messages that arrive with your trousers down at Thanksgiving or Christmas. So I'd like to open up the questions to the floor. We've got some microphones hanging around. So just whilst you're having a quick think around what questions you'd like to ask our experts, I have a quick question for you all, which is sort of leading off something that you said, Will, in terms of 18% digital adoption in Scotland. There seems to be a great lacking in skills. Is there any support? How can we help people to increase that? Because it's hugely disparative between London and Manchester and Scotland, the northeast and east of England.
Yeah, I think, we've been doing a lot of work across the Scottish region, both at a government level, talking about their digital innovation strategy for the next 10 years and talking as well about actually how do we overcome this skills gap piece. I think when you talk with businesses at a ground level, it's a real problem. It's something which people are really feeling is hurting them at the moment, and maybe, when the local skills aren't being retained within Edinburgh, for example, as a city. So I think there's no quick fire answer to it. What I would say is, recently we saw some good investment in Codebase for local incubation hubs, 7 launched across Scotland, and I think that's a really positive move, which is more aimed towards obviously startups to kind of upskill. We offer a range of free training services Amazon Web Services to help you kind of upskill your team. I think there's always that conversation between upskilling and hiring, and I think it's a blend between the both. As we saw previously in my slides, there is now a decision point for business owners where we have to start investing in our own staff. I often hear business owners say to me, well, I don't want to invest in staff, and then they leave anyway. Well, you haven't got a choice, because if you don't invest in your staff, they will leave. So I think building a culture, we've got stats that show 87% employees are 87% more likely to stay with you if you invest in them and upskill them within cloud. Everyone within IT now wants to have certifications within the major hyperscalers, whether it's GCP, Azure, or AWS. So what I would say, we do have some programs in place that are interesting. So one of my own team members created something called the CertUp program, which is an opportunity for you to get in touch with us. We do a learning assessment, so what are your learning needs? And we can actually provide you as a business with the potential to do free exams on behalf of AWS to get training certifications. So, for example, we just handed out 50 yesterday to a customer that is looking to migrate with us. So not only are they getting funding for the migrations, the migration costs are going to be kind of not totally covered, but very largely covered. We're also investing in their training as well. But I do think businesses and employees themselves need to take ownership of this problem as well.
Absolutely.
Right?
Okay, that's great, thank you. And Simon, I was going to ask you, so you've achieved a lot since you incorporated, that's a very short time. In your experience, because I know that you've been in the business for longer than the organisation's been going, what do you think is actually the biggest challenges that is stopping customers from migrating to the cloud? Is it that they don't understand the funding that's available? Is it the fear that you were kind of mentioning?
Yeah, I think that's what we see. So often, I often be the first person to talk to the customer after the salesperson's kind of got the opportunity, and I ask the question, what stopped you moving ahead at this point? Why are you talking to us? And it's a bit like, we don't know where to start. It's like, where do you actually have to start? Because not everyone has access to a whole bunch of tools that they can deploy across, and it's taken us years to actually hone the process of building out that assess report, and you only kind of got a real snapshot of it. It's very in-depth, particularly when you look at the interconnection of all the different architecture and what we're going to migrate, and then we put risk scales which next week, and that's a lot of work to do. If you've got a business to run, it's not normally a priority. So I think it often is just, I've got to get my day job done. I haven't got time to do that. So I think we've kind of almost hit a rich stream, hence the reason why our growth, and we're recruiting on average like 2 people a week at the moment, it feels like.
Wow.
And it is crazy, but it's because there is demand to move to the cloud. And obviously, Scotland we've invested in only really recently in the last 6 months, and that's off the back of Amazon saying we need help to really kind of help the customers in Scotland. So we're all over it really. But yeah, I think.
Well, as a business in Scotland, thank you. And perfect, lovely. And Josh, I was going to ask you. So, I mean, fascinating. But how do you keep on top of the threats for the cloud? So most of my cybersecurity stuff is taken from reports and /TV. So they seem to come up with a new threat every week. How are you keeping on top of that? Yeah,
absolutely. And that's an essential part of what we do in LitLogic. We have a global threat research team as well as the SOC analysts. So it means that one of the challenges for cybersecurity is that it's constantly moving forward, whether it's developing new capabilities like containerization or Fargate. Then that presents new ways that we're going to have to analyze that. And also it might introduce new threats, new avenues for people to come in. Attackers are always looking for the novel way to exploit your environment, because that's going to have the greatest chance of success. 0 days used to be the currency of nation states. Last year we saw, or this year rather, we saw more 0 days than we've ever seen previously, which is kind of scary, but also I think it shows how well the security industry is scrutinizing these to find these emerging threats in the 0 days. But really the way to combat them is to have a strong security part, you rely on those things, and threat hunting is something that we do. It's some of the more high-value, difficult tasks that organizations face themselves, because it's very easy to have detections for stuff that you know is bad. That's why antivirus and EDR work so well. If you know bad, stop it there in its tracks. Machine learning helps us with some of the unknowns that start to, this is likely bad, let's investigate. But there's still no replacement for a person manually scrolling through, having just done some fresh research and finding out these outliers, and that helps secure our customers, but also it feeds the rest of our detections and our intelligence.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the floor? Because I have another question that I'm quite wanting to ask. Okay, I'm going to ask my question. It's actually for all three of you. So, Will and I were talking just before the session. Full disclosure, I've been an AWS customer since 2006. And we were talking about how things have changed so radically since we started using AWS in 2006 to how it is today. So I'm going to ask you to put on your future thoughts. Like, where do you think we're going to be in 5 years in terms of cloud, microservices, and also security threats? Are we going to be in a similar space, or actually do you think that we'll have moved over quite far? I don't know who would like to take that. That's quite a big question, sorry.
I can start, because luckily I got asked this question recently on a Tech UK thing. So, and it was slightly framed differently. It's more like what organisations do, once they've moved into the cloud, what's kind of next, what are you going to see over the next 5 years? And we work really closely with some of the emerging tech within AWS and some of the beta stuff coming out. And it's machine learning, AI, data analytics, storage. They're the big areas, because people have moved stuff to the cloud, but they're not necessarily using the cloud and the services around it. So an example would be customers moved a whole load of data and they've just stuck it in a S3 bucket or something. But actually that data is really valuable. I mean, that's the oil of today, really, the data. That's probably customer data going back years, and you can get lots of trends and forecasts and other elements that are going to be in that. But how do you extract that out? Amazon have built a kind of plethora of different technologies, AI, machine learning, that can apply to the storage data that you've got in the cloud, and you can start building out interesting kind of reports, and you can make decisions on those reports, and it might integrate into your marketing team as well, and it is building out these data analytical platforms using some of the machine learning, artificial intelligence. So it's not just moving into the cloud, it's actually using the ecosystem of the cloud. And that was extending, and also to IoT. I think it's going to be major. I don't think IoT is just going to be like the Samsungs and the Apple and car manufacturers. I think everybody, I mean, we're talking to some Scottish organisations at the moment in the farming industry to kind of track how they're feeding the cows and how the grass and the crops are growing. And there's loads of data points within that if pulled together and manipulated and put into nice dashboards, you can actually start making really key decisions on that side of things. So that's the kind of thing we're seeing, you know, more people saying, okay, yeah, cloud's cloud, it's been around since 2006, what else can I do in that space? And that's really interesting.
That's really interesting. And are you working with data scientists?
Yeah. I mean, one of the recruits we got, our CTOs here today, was actually interviewing one. So yeah, I never thought we would. We thought we were just cloud, but then as you get more into this stuff, you need those other skills to really help.
Brilliant, lovely, thank you.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll answer the security part of it. But I mean, I think security is potentially either reach or come into this kind of critical point where it's been something that's been swept under the carpet for a while historically, and by doing so, what we've really allowed the adversaries to do is get more and more sophisticated. There's been some fantastic revelations in the last few years where usually due to infighting, they leak some of the information about themselves or chat logs, and we got to see the operations of how they work, and they work like legal operations, legal organizations. They have HR departments, they request time off, they negotiate their salaries. Some of them don't even know they're working for hacker groups, and they do have high turnover. Because of that, they've got excellent training documentation. So that's really exacerbated the problem, how they're getting more sophisticated, because as they successfully ransom somebody, they make money, they reinvest that because they know they can make more money. Because of this, I think the world has woken up a little bit, that this is not just a problem that people face in isolation, it's a collective problem, because maybe the government spends all their money making sure they're secure, but if all of their civilians, their public, their private sector is being ransomed, they're going to get, the adversaries get better. So it's this collaborative defense mentality that's starting to take off. You see it in threat intelligence already, where everybody is willing to share the latest things they've seen about a certain actor. And that's the only way we're going to start to fight the challenge together and start to see these actors start to dwindle. And we've already seen ransomware. A few gangs have started to turn their backs on ransomware. It's become too difficult because things like the framework we saw there, people are more resilient towards it. So as long as that continues to go, we're seeing governments even go and scan out, the UK government scanning all of the public assets of everybody so they can tap you on the shoulder and say, look, you're terribly, terribly vulnerable. These type of initiatives are going to be great for us to make sure that security becomes everybody's problem, and that's from the top level down to somebody an employee who might think they're not involved in security. Everybody is part of the security solution.
That's Perfect, thank you. I suppose if the Trojans had thought more about a collective response, then that horse wouldn't have got through the wall. Lovely, Will.
Yeah, I think we're in the middle of two major transformations that are happening. One is the technology transformation that's happening globally, and the other is just we're at a point whereby we have no choice with regarding sustainability now. So I think, very much the future unicorns in terms of big growth businesses are going to be those that are what they call twin transformers, so those that are sustainably transforming and digitally transforming, and they will be the customers of the future, the companies of the future that people want to work with. And I personally, I think we're going to look back in 25 years' time and look back at this period as the biggest change in potentially our history, whereby we have no choice now. And pleasingly, I think there are certain elements that the cloud brings with sustainability, like we have in line with the Paris Agreement. We've got a commitment which we're in line with for our data centers to be using renewable energy by 2025, which we're on track with at the moment. But I think that aside, how we unlock the value of data to make much better decisions with how we kind of tackle the sustainability conversation is going to be intriguing in the coming years. I think the two work together.
I had an idea a few years back. We should build old people's homes and hospitals on top of data centres, and then they could heat them for themselves.
There you go.
So we'll talk about that afterwards. We've run out. Oh, we've got a question just at the back there, Stissa. Oh, I've got a microphone to you. If you don't mind.
If an ND,
Just yeah.
We can hear you.
if an ND, CEO said to me, who am I protecting against? Is it a Russian gang or is it Iranian state-sponsored hacking? Could I honestly say to him, if it's a state-sponsored hacking, we can go so far, but we can't really protect you if, let's take Iran. They decided to take your company down, encrypt your data, might not even ask for a ransom.
Yeah.
Can you give me a view on that? I mean, what do you say to them? If you're asked that question, what do you say?
Absolutely. So, part of what we do as part of our threat hunting activities is start to cluster these adversaries. So that means take the activity we think is linked to one group, whether that is a nation state group, whether that is just a hacker group, whether that is script kiddies having a bit of fun. And so we start to profile lots of these groups that we see all the time in our 4,000 plus customer base. And some of those are ATPs, so they are the state-sponsored advanced persistent threats. And they do demonstrate a much higher degree of sophistication, which makes it more difficult for us to track in some scenarios. But it's not impossible.
You're telling me they leave a trail?
They leave it, yeah. So if we talk, for example, the 0-day point that I made earlier, if you look at the attack chain that we had before, it would be impossible to have a 0-day for every single stage of that, because that is crazy if someone managed that. The odds are so small. There might be elements of that are novel or really hard to detect that a nation state's probably going to use, but there will still be points in that chain where it is detectable. And once you know that there's a problem, if you get eyes on it, you start looking at it, you will find there's signs of them in there. There's always breadcrumbs, there's always traces, provided you've got the data to be able to inspect, like the logs and such.
Since we were talking about skill levels and the lack of them, perhaps that's why Scotland's not taking it up as high as it. These people are going to cost you money. They're going to cost you a lot of money. If they could track these things that are state-sponsored, because they're the ones that I guess have the most power and the most resource behind them, you're going to need to have some pretty switched-on people.
Yeah, well, you're going to need to have, you won't even need to switch on people. You could rely upon others if you do find something. But the point is to have detections in place that you can see when something is wrong, and then you can get someone on retainer, for example, to do data forensics and instant response that can really come and scrutinize that. You don't have to have this all in-house, but you can't just bury your head in the sand and turn a blind eye to it because it's too difficult. Put the stuff that you can in place, and then get relationships that if it does get something that you're not able to face on your own, you can call in somebody to support.
So if you're costing a move to the cloud, you would have to factor in having that type of resource and being prepared to put that in the budget.
Or take a service.
Or take a service.
Yeah.
The one that's going to really do you damage is the higher up one, the state-sponsored ones, I'm assuming.
So just one of the interesting things about the state-sponsored ones is they don't tend to do the devastating angles. You know, you mentioned the kind of Iran wiping all the data. They're probably not going to do that to you unless you're doing something that has irked them. But what really common one we see is actually Chinese sponsored actors sit there quietly and they just look for what kind of IP can I get, what data can I leak and maybe use from our economy. So they are probably the less destructive of the adversaries. But really, from my perspective, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter who they are. You can detect the actions that they do, and that's going to alert you to their activities.
Lovely, thank you. Well, can you join me in one last round of applause for Simon, Josh and Will?